So we'll start the presentation with a video.
Some breaking news coming into us now, and a cyber attack in Iran has interrupted petrol distribution at the country's service station.
This morning, we're learning more about an alarming rise in cyber attacks targeting key U.S. institutions. The latest happened just yesterday when more than a dozen websites for major airport were temporarily knocked offline. Pro-Russian hackers now claiming responsibility.
Evin is really the heart and brute manifestation of the power of the Ayatollahs. This prison is notorious for arresting, torturing, raping, and executing of many innocents.
Pro-Russian hacker group Killnet stole data allegedly belonging to the NATO security alliance.
Russian hackers were inside Ukraine's telecoms giant Kyivstar for months last year, and when they attacked on December 12th, they knocked the operator completely offline and affected some 24 million users for days.
All right. So all the attacks you saw in the video were conducted by groups of hacktivists. In past decades, activities recognized as activism were mostly limited to minor website defacements or DDoS attacks, essentially politically motivated annoyances. These acts, bless you, these acts made the headlines, but the lasting effects were minimal. And the attacks shown in this video suggest that now things started to change. It demonstrates a rising trend in recent years in which groups, seemingly state-sponsored threat actors, yet posing as activists, are conducting large scale of cyber and influence operations against the targets. So we will touch it thoroughly today, but before that, my name is Itay Cohen. I'm doing research in Checkpoint Research. I'm an activist without the H, and most of my free time is dedicated to political and social activism, mainly focusing on helping animals. I'm co-maintainer of the open source reverse engineering frameworks Rising and Cutter, and last year I was selected to the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. All right, so I mentioned influence operation, and just to make sure that we are all on the same page, what are influence operations? Well, influence operations are coordinated efforts to manipulate or to corrupt a public debate in order to achieve some kind of a political goal or strategic objective. So in addition to destructive cyber attacks and cyber espionage attacks that we are very familiar with, governments around the world are increasingly using cyber influence operations. Now, these kind of attacks usually combine offensive cyber attacks on one hand with messaging and amplifications on social media, and together they try to shift the perceptions or the actions of the target audience. And this new wave of hacktivism is increasingly blurring the lines between government-sponsored attacks and hacktivism. Now, these attacks usually make use of cyber personas. And a cyber persona is a public-facing group or individual that takes responsibility for cyber attacks, for these attacks that I showed, while providing plausible deniability for the group or the country or whoever it is behind the attack. And so over the past few years, 5 years or so, I tracked more than 30 hacktivist groups, cyber personas like this. And I tracked their announcements on social media, Telegram, Twitter, forums, websites, and as a reverse engineer, more naturally to me, I collect the tools they deploy in the attack when they are available to me, and reverse engineer it and so on. And during this time, I felt like I have good understanding of some of these groups, what targets they usually focus on, and so on. And I had this feeling that sometimes some groups felt like being operated by the same organizations. But last year, almost 1 year ago, my confidence in my understanding of some of these hacktivist groups and some of these actions has started to reduce. And the first change was a couple of weeks after the October 7th attack conducted by Hamas in Israel. Out of a sudden, groups that were not active for many years started resurfacing. they even adopted different focus topics than what they used to have. In some occasions, groups that until then seemed completely independent started echoing similar messages. So I started to get confused because this is not what I knew about these groups, so what's going on here? And understanding that relying on gut feeling and intuition is not a solid approach to threat intelligence, I decided to go on a journey and explore new approaches that might be more solid and consistent and reliable. And so this presentation and this research is my own journey in finding more reliable methodological approach to doing threat intelligence and understanding these activist groups and the relationships between them. So the first thing I did was to brain dump some of ideas, like what can I do? The first option was to keep on with what I had done so far, collect the tools, note who are the victims, reverse engineer the binaries, and so on. But the problem is that more often than not, the tools deployed in the attacks are not really available to me because they are kept within the incident response team that handle the incidents. But if we don't have the binaries, what we do have? Well, we do have texts. Plenty of text messages are being published by these groups on a daily basis on their hundreds of Telegram channels and Twitter accounts. And you see, the incline of popularity of using cyber personas for basically everything, dreaming it will help them get away with it or something, might just be their Achilles heel. Because the more messages they write, the more they try to engage their target audience, the more data that we, as threat intelligence analysts, the more data that we have and we can work with. And so, what we can learn from texts? Well, basically, I wanted to understand three main things. And the first one, what are the topics these groups discuss and what topics they don't discuss? You see, it's important to remember that these groups were created probably by intelligence agencies or military forces or security organizations like this. And they were created to serve some kind of operational purpose. Understanding what they're focusing on, understanding what they are not focusing on, can help us in profiling these accounts. And I wanted to understand how these topics of interest change over time, how geopolitical events affect the topics of interest of these accounts. The second thing I wanted to understand is what I can learn about these groups by the way they write. And maybe I can tie together multiple groups into a single writer by the way they communicate. And finally, I wanted to understand whether it will be possible to tie some of these groups to any known threat actor. And to answer these questions, I decided to use an approach which is rather new to my toolbox, which is machine learning. Basically, I will use language-based machine learning models in combination with a little bit of generative AI technology, like GPT, or more specifically, I will use topic modeling and models related to stylometry and semantic similarities with a large language model. And if it sounds a little bit gibberish to you, a little bit mouthful, don't worry, it's not a machine learning 101 talk, so you should all be all right. But first, an honest disclaimer, I'm not a machine learning expert. I do understand machine learning, and I did read a lot in the last year, but this does not make me an expert. That's it. All the processes I will show you here today and I conducted in this research were peer-reviewed by my colleagues and friends in Checkpoint's data science team. So that's a great opportunity to thank them for their support and guidance and making sure that I'm not embarrassing myself here on the stage. So thank you. All right, so the first concept I mentioned is topic modeling. Well, topic modeling is the process of applying machine learning algorithms to cluster data into particular topics. Or in simpler words, we basically try to make sense of a bunch of documents. You see, we often have a bunch of documents, whether these are, articles, emails, tweets, vegan restaurant reviews, and so on. And we want to make sense of this, out of these documents. And obviously, we cannot read through tens of thousands of these, right? So we need to resort to some kind of machine learning, or in this case, topic modeling. And to simplify how it works, basically, it extracts topics from a bunch of documents. And instead of saying, here's a topic about a cyber attack, it gives us back a number of words like cyber, attack, parliament, and UK, so that we, the users, can understand, oh, this is a topic about a cyber attack against the British Parliament. Because if, for example, I would give you the topic, say, cars, then it's still not very clear. Is it about older cars, newer cars, Tesla specifically? Is it about a Disney movie cars, right? So we need some contextual information, and this is what topic modeling helps us doing. And then, after extracting these keywords, it aggregates together documents with similar topics. And so, this is nice. This is what kind of what we looked for. And so we extracted all the messages from Telegram and Twitter of more than 35 accounts, activist accounts, cyber personas, which is more than 20,000 messages overall, which is more than enough for our machine learning models to work. And when we apply the topic modeling algorithm on top of this data, we get back a list of topics. And you can see that each topic is represented by a bunch of keywords. And if we look at topic number 1, we can see that we have almost 3,000 messages from Telegram and Twitter assigned to this topic. And this topic is represented by the words attack, Russian, cyber, Ukrainian, and hack. And you can see, you can understand why the document on the right, the tweet or the Telegram messages was assigned to this topic. Let me read it out loud for you. We announce for all Russian hackers, we begin the cyber attack on Ukrainian websites, right? It fits there. So now that we have all these topics from all these documents, we understand that some topics are too small or too specific, so we can merge some of these topics together. In other occasions, we see topics that are too broad. For example, from the representative words of topic number 1, it's not really clear whether we are speaking about Russian hackers attacking Ukraine or Ukrainian hackers attacking Russia, right? So we can ask the model to split it for us and have 2 different topics for this. We can also drop topics. For example, one of the accounts, Russian accounts, discussed the performance of the Ukrainian singer in the Eurovision Song Contest. And while it might be a very interesting topic in general, it does not serve our research objective, so we can drop this kind of topics. All right. So now that we have all these topics, we dropped and merged and split some of them, we have a very nice list of topics. But the problem is that for me, it's still not very nice to understand what this topic is about just by reading a list of comma-separated words. So this is where LLM comes in handy. So we can simply ask GPT or your favorite large language model to name the topic for us. And so we tell it, we have a topic, and this is the document, all the documents from the topic. We can provide a model with all the documents, or maybe top 100 that best represent the topic. We give it the representative keywords, and then we ask GPT, if you don't mind, please label this topic for us. And let me tell you that GPT, in this case, did a really good job. This is a very nice, small example of how we can utilize AI for our threat intelligence work. And so we got back a list of topics with meaningful names. And it would not be a surprise to learn that many of the topics were about cyber attacks against specific countries. For example, cyber attacks against Ukraine, against Russia, cyber attacks against Iran, Israel, the United States, cyber attacks against India, against Hezbollah in Lebanon, against Spain, and on and on and on. But there were other topics as well, like the Israel and Hamas war, the upcoming US elections, the Russia invasion of Ukraine, and so on. So now that we have all these topics, we can start analyzing them. And for me, a very nice way to analyze these kind of topics is by using visualizations. So if we visualize these topics and documents, we can see which accounts are discussing each topic and get a better understanding of what accounts are interested in these topics or another. It would not be a surprise, for example, to find out that the topic of cyber attacks against Ukraine was discussed by groups like Cyber Army of Russia Reborn, Just Evil, and so on. We can also see how different hacktivist accounts discuss non-hacking related events like the Israel and Hamas war. So we saw groups from all across the spectrum discussing the Israel and Hamas war, groups that focusing usually on India or Russia, all could not ignore this topic. And I mentioned that we can ask the model to split the topic for us. So we can split it and see how the groups are divided in terms of which side in the conflict they are sided with. And again, this is very helpful for us to understand who might be behind some of these accounts and whose purpose could it serve. We can also do vice versa. And instead of showing the accounts per topic, we can show the topics per account. And we see, again, this helps us in profiling these accounts. We see which accounts are focusing on what topics. So let's take, for example, Black Wolves. This is a group that writes in Persian and English and primarily targets in Iran. But when applying this topic modeling on the account, we found out that they also announced an attack on Russia, which was weird. And indeed, this is a screenshot from the Telegram channel announcing an attack against a Russian organization. And this is something that I know I would have missed, and in fact, I did miss it when manually going through thousands of messages like this. So this is where a more methodological approach helps us in understand that this group has more interest than just Iran, for example. We can also visualize all these topics on the timeline and see how the topics of interest of these groups change over time. We can see how often they speak about certain topics and when did they start discussing certain topics. We can also see how geopolitical events affect the topics of interest of certain groups. So for example, the Russia invasion of Ukraine, it started a big surge in cyber attacks against Ukraine, or in the topic of cyber attacks against Ukraine. We can also see, and this is valuable information, how long it took for Ukrainian groups to respond with cyber attacks of their own. The October 7th attack conducted by Hamas in Israel had started the Israel-Hamas war topic. This can also help us, this kind of timeline, to see if certain groups had prior inside information regarding certain geopolitical events before the events even took place. And maybe, just maybe they hyped their target audience. Maybe they shared on Telegram or Twitter things like, big thing is going to happen, stay tuned, or something like that. So again, this is very valuable threat intelligence information about these groups and who might be behind them. All right, so now that we have all these topics, we can spend days analyzing them and get a better profiling of these accounts and think like who might be behind them. But we need to move on to the second part in our analysis, which is looking at their unique stylistic, or the unique fingerprints they leave behind each of their message, and understand if we can connect some of these groups together. Recognize this man in the picture? It's iconic, right? This is probably the most famous police sketch in history. This is the Unabomber, a man that the FBI spent nearly 20 years hunting down. The Unabomber terrorized the United States with a series of bombings spanning nearly 2 decades, while being very careful not to leave a lot of clues behind. But at some point, a breakthrough occurred. You see, the Unabomber loved writing, and he often documented his ideas and opinion and philosophy in text. And he wrote a manifesto called Industrial Society and Its Future, a manifesto that he demanded that will be published on a major newspaper. And when it was published on a major newspaper, a man reached out to the FBI saying he recognized the writing style in this manifesto. It was of his brother, Ted Kaczynski. He also provided the FBI with letters and other documents written by Ted. And the FBI linguistic analysis concluded that whoever wrote the manifesto and these letters and documents are most likely the same person. And so this provided the basis for a search warrant. And on April 3rd, 1996, 2 FBI agents, accompanied with a bunch of police officers, knocked on the door of a 10 by 12-foot cabin secluded in Montana mountains and arrested Ted Kaczynski. And this knock on the door was nearly 20 years in the making. And this is one of the most famous examples of using stylometry, the study of linguistic style and authorship attribution. It is a powerful reminder that our writing, just as our speech, is imprinted with our life experiences, personalities, and ideologies. It was Kaczynski's distinct writing style, in this case, his syntax, his choice of words, his tone that eventually led the FBI to arrest him. So stylometric analysis compare how similar two pieces of text are by looking at things like the sentence structure, the vocabulary, and other patterns like this. And it can tell us if two pieces of writing were written by the same person or by a person with similar writing style. And so applying stylometric models on our 20,000 messages that we collected can help us extract more than 200 features from the messages. And we can look at things like how the sentences, number of sentences or words in average in a message, how the author uses punctuations, emojis, which emojis they like to use, spatial characters, and so on. How the author uses verbs and nouns, and so many things that we can extract. And the stylometric funnel, as I call it, is pretty simple. First, we extract the features from all the collected Telegram messages and Twitter messages that we collected. Then, we aggregate this information into a single stylistic description of each of these accounts. And then, once we have a distinct stylistic fingerprint for these hacktivist accounts, we can start and analyze and compare them to each other. And when we do this, we can get a very, very nice graph of connections. And some connections are from an obvious large cluster that the model believes are all operated by the same organization, but some of the connections are pretty simple and contain only a pair of nodes that the model believes that group A and group B are operated by the same author. And earlier this year, Mandiant released their APT44 report, and in this report, they mentioned that the Solent Sepek Group and Cyber Army of Russia Reborn and SACNet are all cyber personas used by APT44, a Russian-affiliated group. And my analysis using stylometry reached a similar conclusion by using this model, even before this information was public. Does it mean that it's enough of an evidence to reach an absolute conclusion? Absolutely not, but it's another layer of certainty, and these layers of certainty are very important for us as threat intelligence researchers. The model can also highlight, and this is just one example, of messages from different groups that are extremely similar in the way they write, the emojis, the links, and so on. Again, this is just one example out of the dozens from so many groups. So it's not only the style, but sometimes the content itself is extremely similar. And the stylometric model can also alert us if it believes that more than one person is writing the texts of a single account. And a funny thing happened when I applied the stylometric model on messages written by the IT Army of Ukraine, a group that mostly writes in Ukrainian and English and operates against Russian organizations. And the model believed that whoever wrote the first 18 messages of the account on Twitter from 2016 to 2022 are all different person from the one that writes the current messaging. See for yourself. IT Army of Ukraine writes in Arabic and about football. What's going on here? And yeah, it kept like this on and on and on, cheering for the Egyptian football team and writing in Arabic. So what's going on here? Well, the thing is that all these tweets, all these 18 tweets, are not regular tweets, they are replies. And my guess is that whoever operating this account is using a stolen account or purchased an account or bought or repurposed an old one. And they deleted all the tweets from the timeline, but they probably forgot to delete the replies. And this is, again, helps us understand better how these groups operate. And I didn't mention it earlier, but the topic modeling algorithm also found out a topic about Egyptian football, which I initially found really weird, but this explains why it was the case. So both approaches, both models recognize this anomaly. All right, so during this presentation, I showed you, bunch of graphs and visualization, and it's only a handful of examples out of the so many that we collected. Eventually, we will release this data to the public in some way or another, and I would love to hear your feedback and your corrections and your comments, and how do you think that you can use topic modeling or stylometry or something similar to that in your own threat intelligence work, in your own research. Just for example, say profiling the way certain ransomware negotiators write, or detect phishing attacks, or stuff like that. I think this can be very, very helpful in this regard, so I would love to hear your feedback. Because the things that I showed you here today and presented here are not some kind of a bulletproof approach, but it's part of trying and applying new techniques and new technologies to our threat intelligence work. And I mentioned it before, we saw a blurring of lines between government-sponsored attacks and what used to be grassroots hacktivist actions. And these threat actors, they are not static, they evolve, just as our methods to counter them must evolve. So we need to try new things, collaborate, work together, innovate, and it's always important to keep in mind that not knowing everything is what drove us to seek understanding in the beginning. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Itay.